A little boy was playing one day with a very expensive vase, and he put his hand into it and could not remove it. He tried again and again, and his father and mother too tried their best to help the boy, but all in vain. So they were thinking of breaking the vase. But before they did, the father said, "Now, son, make one more try. Open your hand and hold your fingers out straight as you see me doing, and then pull." To their astonishment, the little fellow said, "Oh, no, Father, I couldn't put my fingers out like that, because if I did, I would drop my dollar."
One of the hardest things I've ever had to do, so bear with me. I sat down a few days ago in an attempt to write this eulogy for my brother. And I quickly realized that it was an impossibility to put into words what my brother meant to me, and not only me, but to our entire family. How do you describe somebody as unique and free-spirited and kind as Stephen? And as I stand here now, today, I know Stephen's looking down at me. He's already shaking his head. My funeral attire is all wrong. So he would rather I was up here now with a Tampa Bay Bucks shirt on, Seminoles hat, and probably wearing a pair of Cubbies socks. His love and passion for sports stayed with him throughout his life. And his sense of humor was contagious. But it's very hard to think that We are here, and my brother is not. At the time of his passing, a chaplain came into our mother's living room and said, "I'm sorry, he's gone." An immense sadness and even anger came over me. The idea that my brother is gone. But with the help of Father Brian, I'm learning that he's not gone, but rather in heaven with God. And that as long as we keep our memories of Stephen alive, he'll always be with us. Zoe, be proud that you can always call Stephen your daddy. As I've heard you say so many times before. And know that you might not be able to see him. He'll always be with you. As a young kid, I would climb the tree in our front yard and just wait for my brother to get home from school. As he would walk home from the bus stop, I imagine he must have been thinking the entire time what he and I were going to do. Because as soon as he spotted me, he'd say, "Today, Luke, we're going to," and off we'd go. He always had it all figured out. See, Stephen was a thinker and so very smart. As kids, we would take our bikes to the 7-Eleven for a piece of candy or a pack of baseball cards. He would make sure before we left we had enough money, calculate the tax and everything ahead of time. Of course, all in his head. But the thing about going for a bike ride with Stephen was that I don't think he knew how to go slow. He was tough to keep up with. He had only 2 gears, full throttle and sleep. But though tough to keep up with, he made sure to never leave me behind. And that would hold true for the rest of his life. The summer after my graduating year of high school, I worked with him, building pool enclosures. I was again reminded how very gifted he was. An incredible builder with a quick mind. A close friend of mine from high school wrote to me earlier this week and said, "Everything then was bigger than life, and your brother was the king." It was a great honor. It is a great honor to be Stephen's brother. And love is not an easy feeling to put into words, and I may, in fact, be the worst. But nor is loyalty or trust or joy. But Stephen was all of these. He loved life completely, and he lived it intensely. Life was never boring with Stephen. He absolutely and wholeheartedly loved his family. And to his friends here today, he thought of you as family, and he cherished each and every one of you. And if it had been some time since you and he spent some time together, I know he would have liked it otherwise, but life is tricky. Stephen, you were loved and admired by so many. You enriched all of our lives, and we will forever be grateful for the time spent with you. And as you yourself exemplified, for those close to you that had passed, though gone, will never be forgotten.
Peace be with you. Friends, on this third Sunday of Lent, the church asks us to look at one of the really great texts in the Old Testament, namely the Ten Commandments from the book of Exodus. I've said before that Lent's a time of getting back to basics spiritually, and this is a good way to do it. Just as an athlete will go back to the fundamental moves of his sport, so in the moral and spiritual order, we go back to fundamentals, go back to basics. Can I suggest you go back to this text in Exodus? If you don't have the Ten Commandments clearly in mind, commit them to memory. They're a wonderful way to examine your conscience as you prepare for confession. Even at the end of the day, to go through the Ten Commandments, say, well, how did I do in regard to these basics of the spiritual life? So I want to say in this brief homily something very simple about each one. We know that the Ten Commandments are divided into two tables or tablets, right? The first three dealing with our relation to God, and then the last seven dealing with our relations with each other. The first table is by leaps and bounds the most important. It's a basic biblical intuition. Having our relationship with God right is the condition for the possibility of anything else being right in our lives. If the relation to God is off kilter, everything else will become off kilter. And so we pay special attention to the first table. Commandment 1, I'm the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods besides me. Now, there's a trivial way to read this, that God is sort of this petty, jealous, tyrant. No. It's the most important element in the spiritual life. God doesn't need us. God doesn't need anything. So it's not a matter of God falling into a jealous, a snit here. When there's clarity about what we worship, the rest of our life falls into order. When there's ambiguity about that, then there's difficulty across the board. And I've said this to you before. We all worship something. There's always something in your life of supreme value. There's some center of gravity, if I can shift metaphors. Now, it could be a pleasure, it could be money, it could be your country, it could be your family, all sorts of things. You shall have no other God besides me. In other words, any act of idolatry, turning something other than God into God, will throw the rest of your life off kilter. Clarity about the one God whom we worship, that's the most important. Second commandment, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Now, there's a legitimate sense here where we shouldn't swear, as we put it. We shouldn't use the name of God in this sort of disrespectful way, and that's certainly true. Probably, though, what they had in mind here in the Old Testament was something like the use of God's name in a superstitious way as a kind of incantation. I'm going to use the name of God to get God to do something that I want. See, now we're getting close to the spiritual problem here. The idea is to worship God. That means God is my highest value. I've turned my life over to God. But there's a permanent danger in the spiritual order that I'm going to try to use God for my purposes. I spoke last week about falling in love with the benefits of God. If I can manipulate God so as to get what I want, See, now I'm in bad spiritual territory. So don't use the name of the Lord your God in vain means don't think you can ever manipulate God or put God to the test. No. God puts us to the test sometimes. We heard that with Abraham last week. Saw it with Job. But we don't put God to the test. We don't use his name as a kind of manipulative incantation. Third commandment, remember to keep holy the Sabbath day. How basic this was, everyone, to the biblical Israelites. The Sabbath. Not just a day of rest, but the day of worship. The day when we, in a embodied, concrete, conscious way, order our lives through ritual practice to God. And every part of it, I think, matters. It's so easy to make this abstract. Oh, sure, I believe in God. I've got this idea of God in my mind. Well, that's not sufficient. Oh, yeah, God's the central value of my life. Yeah, but do you express that and act that out ritually? See, if we were angels, that might be enough. I just have this kind of clear notion. But we're not angels. We're embodied spirits, as we heard a couple weeks ago. Therefore, to make my worship of God real to me, it has to be expressed in this disciplined and regular and ritualized way. May I suggest, everyone, that the falling away of so many in the Western culture from keeping holy the Sabbath has wreaked havoc. That when we stop signaling to ourselves and to others that we do indeed worship God, things tend to fall apart in us. You know, the test is, I believe in God. Oh, yeah, God's most important. Well, show me. Show me. What does that look like in your life? Keep holy the Sabbath day. Now, that's the first table, the first three commandments, having to do with our relation to God, nothing more important. Now, the second table, the remaining 7, having to do with our relation to each other. Now, why? Well, if you're in touch with God who is love, that love is going to surge through you into the world. That's the way it works. The more you're connected to God, the more that love will flow through you into the world. So, fourth commandment, honor your father and your mother. Well, yes, your literal father and mother. But most of the commentators say this means something like reverence and honor and love your family. Well, if you claim to be a person of God, which means a person of love, but you can't love your own family, something is really off in you. If you can't love those who are nearest and dearest to you, well, then how will you love anybody else? So starting at home, starting with those closest and dearest to us, of course, we should love them. Fifth commandment, you shall not kill. Probably best rendered or better rendered, you shall not commit murder. Because, there are exceptions. We talk about just war and self-defense and so on, where, a killing might be morally justified. But you shall not murder. Now, I know most of those listening to me, I hope this is true, are not murderers. They have no intention of murdering anybody. But, it's simply not the case that murder isn't a problem in our society. How about the 60 million abortions since Roe v. Wade was passed? How about the almost casual murders taking place on the streets of our major cities? How about euthanasia laws, et cetera, et cetera? There is a growing indifference to life in our society. John Paul II named it the culture of death. And so we need to be alive to this problem of an indifference to the dignity of human life. You shall not kill. Sixth commandment, you shall not commit adultery. Now, I know everyone and his brother thinks the church is obsessed with sex and all that. Well, notice, we don't get to sexual matters till the sixth commandment. So if it was, commandment number 1. But look, does anybody doubt that adultery, that the breaking of the marriage vow, being unfaithful to your spouse, is a source of enormous mischief, and I mean inside the people involved and to those around them. You have to be blind not to see the deleterious effects of infidelity and the breakdown of marriage and the family and all of that. Don't tell anyone who's been involved in pastoral ministry that this is a minor problem. Well, the biblical authors knew that very well. And if the family is the building block of the society, then our whole society suffers from adultery. So stop it, the Bible says. Seventh, you shall not steal. I've talked to people, it's never happened to me, thank God, but whose homes have been ransacked. They come home and they realize a thief has been there. When something's stolen from you, there's something that's uniquely awful about that experience. When something's taken from you, it's such an aggressive, violent, invasive move. It's one of the, in that sense, least loving things you can do. If to love is to will the good of the other, stealing is taking good from somebody. That's why it's such a violation of love. Now, there is that kind of direct stealing, someone breaking in and, committing a burglary. But we know, fellow sinners, there's a lot of ways we steal things from people. A lot of ways we rob them of good things, whether it's their reputation, Watch how we enhance life or take life from people. Do we breathe life into a room, or do we suck life out of a room? That's a form of stealing, it seems to me. 8, I think, is very important today. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Calumny, we call this. A willful lie about someone whose purpose is to harm. Why do we do it? Well, it makes us feel better. Makes us feel more exalted. I can drag you down. I seem higher. Where's this flourishing? We all know. Online, right? The social media culture has caused this to flourish, to bear false witness against our neighbors, to say all kinds of lying and calumnious things. Can I urge everybody, especially during Lent, to watch this tendency, especially as you use social media? When I'm saying something about a person, is it true? And why am I saying it in the first place? To ask those 2 very good questions before you post something online, I'd highly recommend it. Bearing false witness. Watch the 8th commandment. I'll bring 9 and 10 together. You shall not covet your neighbor's goods. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. It's very interesting, that word covet. I've talked to you before about Rene Girard, the great philosopher. He talked about the triangular quality of desire, that we rarely want something simply because it's attractive to us. Very often we want it because somebody else wants it. Right? So why is that object so appealing to me? Well, because that person wants it. And their desire of it awakens in me a desire for it. Watch this. Most of advertising is based on that principle. How come I want certain things? Well, I discover some famous person wants them. Watch 2 kids playing together. One kid is indifferent to a toy until his friend comes in and wants it. Do you see what Girard uncovered was the source of so much of our tension and violence in our society is this triangular quality of desire. Well, the Bible knew about it a long time before Rene Girard. See, don't covet your neighbor's wife and don't covet your neighbor's goods. I mean, desire something for yourself, that's fine. But stop getting into these mimetic triangular conflicts. Watch how we desire. I like that the old word covet is good there because it sort of signals something fresh in our minds. Watch how you covet things. Why do you want the things you want? Is it because someone else desires them? If so, we're on a short route to conflict and chaos. Okay, that's a quick little tour in about 13 minutes through the 10 Commandments. Could I urge you, Lent's a great time for it. Go back to the book of Exodus. Find this text. Walk through these 10 Commandments. Memorize them if you can. Use them next time you go to confession. If you're going to confession during Lent, which you all should do, use the 10 Commandments as a way of examining your conscience. And God bless you.
Of the program with the discussion as it has unfolded. Thank the Lord, Rush Limbaugh's on by the Rush Hawkins Singers is exactly what's called for. the graveyard of forgotten favorites. And thank the Lord, Rush Limbaugh's on.